There's no contradictions in the minds of the citizens in the People's Democracy of the United States. Everyone is basically just for Donald Trump, so there's no contradiction. What? Nobody dares to reveal them publicly? Well, but nobody dares to reveal them publicly. Actually, I'm reading from The Captive Mind and Czeslaw Milosz, the winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature. So this is heavy stuff. It's not a joke. Oh, okay. What are you reading? I'm chapter 3 of Kettman. Officially, contradictions do not exist in the minds of the citizens in the People's Democracies. Nobody dares to reveal them publicly. And yet, the question of how to deal with them is posed in real life. Yeah, even though you joke about it, there are questions. More than others, the members of the intellectual elite, like myself, are aware of this problem. They solve it by becoming actors or podcasters. It is hard to define the type of relationship that prevails between people in the East otherwise than as acting, with the exception that one does not perform on a theater stage, but in the street, office, factory, meeting hall, or even the room one lives in where I do my podcast. Yeah, even in the quarto or the room that I live in. Really? Such podcasting or such acting is a highly developed craft. Yeah, and my craft, is the culmination of everything I've learned and the books I've read and the meditation and all this stuff. And I get the energy from exercising. And such acting or podcasting is a highly developed craft that places a premium upon mental alertness. Yeah, I achieve, in a way, I have, my piano playing is at a premium. It's actually benefits from the mental alertness that I get from playing for 3 hours in tennis. And so instead of practicing the piano, I practice tennis. Oh, is that how you achieve such high quality performances in your piano playing? Yeah. Such piano playing is a highly developed craft that places a premium upon mental alertness that comes from exercise. Okay. Before it leaves the lips, every word must be evaluated as its consequences. A smile that appears at the wrong moment, a glance that is not all it should be, can occasion dangerous suspicions and accusations. Yeah, like if I make a laugh or I say something wrong, or I have the wrong accent, or I do anything wrong, it leads to suspicions and accusations. Even one's gestures, tone of voice, a preference for certain kinds of neckties are interpreted as signs of one's political tendencies. Yeah, and some people on the tennis court, they just look at what I wear and they'll assume that I'm a gringo or I'm some sort of they have their opinions from my attitude and they form opinions, though I'm being a universalist. I'm accepting of everyone. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's nice. A visitor from the Imperium is shocked on coming to the West. In his contacts with others, beginning with porters or taxi drivers. Yeah, the first thing you encounter, like it used to be when you come to New York City, is the taxi driver, I guess, and that's where you get your impression. Yeah, I learned everything from the taxi drivers. Okay. So that's the material, that's the premium of what you have in the podcast, yeah. It's from New York City taxi drivers. Or taxi drivers, he encounters no resistance. Yeah, you don't get resistance from taxi drivers. Like if you want to talk, and they'll talk to you maybe, and, at least in the old days. You getting Listo already, Mar? She's getting ready. The people he meets are completely relaxed. And if he's a good driver, he doesn't make the customer nervous because he doesn't drive like a wacko. He'll try to make the customer relaxed. So he gets a good tip and stuff. Back in the old days. They lack that internal concentration which betrays itself in a lowered head or in restlessly moving eyes. They say whatever words come to their tongues, they laugh aloud. It is possible that human relations can be so direct. Is it possible to have direct human relations anymore with the AI and all that stuff that's going on? Podcasting or just reading a book in daily life differs from podcasting in the theater in that everyone plays to everyone else and everyone is fully aware that this is so. Well, everyone is podcasting is playing to everyone else. And I am playing into this podcast. So, the fact that a man acts or podcast is not to his prejudice is no proof of unorthodoxy. Well, there's no proof that I'm unorthodox, but he must act well, for his ability to enter into his role skillfully proves that he has built his characterization upon an adequate foundation. Yeah. I think if you look into it, I've built this podcast on an adequate foundation. If you consider all the books I've read and my education and the number of years of meditation. How many years? Well, if he makes a passionate speech, and I get very passionate in this podcast, if he makes a passionate speech against the West, he demonstrates that he has at least 10% of the hatred he so loudly proclaims. Yeah, I think some of those people, the Russians or Putin, has demonstrated that he has hatred for the West. If he condemns Western culture lukewarmly, then he must be attached to it in reality. Yeah, some people, some of them are attached. There's so many Easterners that are attached lukewarmly to Western culture. Yeah. People argue that I'm lukewarmly attached to Eastern culture, that I'm but I say that I'm not lukewarm. I thought you were passionate about your attachment to Eastern mysticism. Of course, all human behavior contains a significant amount of acting. Yeah, and I put a lot of acting and nonsense into this podcast because it's a part of human behavior. That's why the book isn't read. I'm reading from the captive mind, but it's not read. It's read in a passionate way, and it's not. It's a significant amount of acting and stuff. A man reacts to his environment and is molded by it, even in his gestures. And I've been molded by my environment, mostly from playing tennis and volleyball and grunting. And they say that grunting, you hit harder and stuff. But nevertheless, what we find in the more people's democracies is a conscious mass play rather than automatic imitation. Conscious acting, if one practices it long enough, develops those traits which one uses most in one's role, just as a man who became a runner because he had good legs develops his legs even more in training. Yeah, the funny thing is, the more I train, the more I play the piano, the better I get, and the more I play tennis, the better I get. Why is that surprising? After long acquaintance with his role, a man grows into it so closely that he can no longer differentiate his true self from the self he simulates, so that even the most intimate of individuals speak to each other in party slogans. Well, I only speak really to myself in this podcast. What are your slogans? Well, to identify oneself with the role one is obligated to play brings relief and permits a relaxation of one's vigilance. Proper reflexes at the proper moment become totally automatic. Yeah, it just becomes... Some of the stuff, my stuff just becomes automatic. Like if I practice a lot of meditation, I just automatically meditate. Or let's say, what else is automatic? Well, you automatically get up and you automatically drink chocolate or you have coffee. This happens in world literature as well. Yeah, and it just so happens I just happened to write a poem every single day. What? Are you going to do that again? And I know you added a few lines to your last poem. And this happens in literature as well. A poet writing a piece of propaganda does not confine himself to a purely rationalist approach. Yeah, and I don't confine myself to a purely rationalist approach, obviously. Okay. Imbued with the thought that poetry ideally should be suited to recitation in chorus. At a meeting, he begins by tuning himself to an appropriate pitch of collective emotion before he can release himself to words in words. Yeah, I'm releasing myself in the words in this podcast. In the theater, the actor who plays the Cid, for example, is the Cid on stage. Yet not every actor, even if he is young and well-built, can play the Cid. He must have an inborn capacity to release himself emotionally in that role. Poetry, as we have known it, can be defined as the individual temperament refracted through social convention. The poetry of the new faith can, on the contrary, be defined as social convention refracted through the individual temperament. That is why the poets who are most adapted to the new situation are those endowed with dramatic talent. The poet creates the character of an ideal revolutionary and writes his verses as the monologue of this character. Yeah, and they're talking about this, new revolution now. So I don't know what they're talking about. They keep talking about it like the Republicans, and after the Trump got full immunity and all this stuff, and they're all excited about this new revolution. And I don't know that there really is a new revolution. He does not speak for himself, but for the ideal citizen. Well, it could be that Trump does not speak for himself, but for the ideal citizen. His results are reminiscent of songs written to be sung on the march. Since the aim is the same, the forging of the fetters of collectivity that bind together an advancing column of soldiers. Yeah, the best example for such song slogans are certain verses of the German poet Bertolt Brecht, which are superior. Brecht has so many, what is it? Oh, the balls? I didn't organize. Yeah, let me finish. I have to finish this podcast, and we're still cleaning the room, which are superior to the works of other Eastern poets because Brecht is fully conscious of the historical process involved. Yeah, Bertolt Brecht wrote a lot of poetry, but it's very socialistic and stuff, and I just basically, I've heard of him, and it's affected music, but I haven't read it much at all. Oh, okay. Your production and poetry and podcasting is so low. Like, why do you have to wait till it rains to do anything? Yeah. I'm on page 56 of The Captive Mind. I've been captivated by the fact that it's raining out and I can't play tennis. Okay. Even though the identification of the play with private thought property is carried very far, a large residue of unassimilated matter remains, which forces one to keep alert. I'm going to try to keep alert even though I got up late.
Keep alert.
I had been to New Jersey and I kept up out late. I was out late when I saw the master in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and I ate late. And what happened to you? You ate food late? That's... why do they serve food late? Yeah, it was like 10 o'clock at night, and I wasn't able to keep alert. A constant and universal masquerade creates an aura that is hard to bear, yet it grants the performer certain not considerable satisfactions. To say something is white when one thinks it's black, to smile inwardly when one is outwardly solemn, to hate. Yeah, I smile inwardly when I'm outwardly solemn, and when one thinks it's black. To hate when one manifests love, to know when one pretends not to know. Yeah, and I actually know everything, but I pretend not to know. What happened to you? It's funny, I went to the book kiosk to buy a book, and they were telling me about the different books you could buy, and I pretended I didn't know anything. What happened to you? Why would you pretend not to know? Thus to play one's adversary for a fool, even as he is playing you for one. These actions lead one to prize one's own cunning above all else. Yeah, my problem is I prize my own cunning above all else. That's why I have to meditate, and that's why I went to see the master despite the traffic, the hour and 15-minute drive, and had to pay the parking. I don't even know what I paid, and what did you pay? You didn't pay that much. Well, you had to pay tolls, but there was a good charging at the third eye. There's nice vibrations. So. Yeah, and you talked to that guy at the bar about the master. Yeah, well, I used my own cunning above all else. Success in the game becomes a source of satisfaction. Yeah, my success in tennis, I've had a lot of successes. The other day we won, me and Miguel we won 6-3. Wow. You won 6-3? Yeah, we won in doubles tennis 6-3 against Nahindra and Sonam. Those are I call them the Nepalese brothers. And he has, do we remember his name by it's the same as Narendra Modi, the Presidente of India. So he's more important to you than the President of India? Yeah. He is the true Narendra. He's more importante to me than the President of India, because he hits the tennis ball, and that's more meaningful to me. Okay, success in the game becomes a source of satisfaction. Yeah, well, that's my success is satisfying, especially when today is raining, and I can enjoy my success from yesterday. Okay, that's a nice thing for you. Simultaneously, that which we protect from prying eyes takes on a special value because it is never clearly formulated in words, and hence has the irrational charm of things purely emotional. Yeah, and I have an irrational charm of things that are purely emotional. In fact, I have purely emotional. I have absolute pure love. So that's not even irrational. Love is not rational. No. Simultaneously, that which we protect from prying eyes, and I keep it from prying eyes in this podcast, takes on a special value because it is never clearly formulated in words. Yeah, and the kind of love that I have cannot be formulated in words. A love of what? Hence has the irrational charm of things purely emotional. So I'm enjoying the irrational charm of things purely emotional. What is going on with you? I know you make all these grunts when you play tennis and you're emotional and you make up these emotions. And if you ask me, I think you're not emotional. Okay. What are you talking about? Yeah, you play very calculating and you hit the tennis ball and you hit it so they can't hit it back. Yeah, okay. Man takes refuge in an inner sanctuary, which is the more precious, the greater the price he pays in order to bar others from access to it. Yeah. These things that are harder to get, the more hard it is to get something, the more people value it. What happened to you? Yeah, these kids, they lose your adult toys. The kid lost my USB light that I use. It's more of a utility light. And, they act like it's a toy and then they lose it and they don't have. It's more precious the greater the price he pays in order to bar others from access to it. Yeah, well, the access to the teachings of the master were harder to get. And let's say you had to be a vegetarian for 6 months before you could even apply. Okay. Or what if you had to work in the garden for 5 years? Or if you only got one mantra every 5 years? Okay. Why don't you just give them one mantra and tell them to work on that one? Don't give them 5 church names. Okay. Man takes refuge in an inner sanctuary, which is the more precious, the greater the price he pays in order to bar others from access to it. Acting on a comparable scale has not occurred often in the history of the human race. Yeah, a podcast on this scale has not occurred often in the history of the human race, yet in trying to describe these new Moors, we happen across a striking analogy in the Islamic civilization of the Middle East. Yeah, so we're trying to describe these new Moors. We happen across a striking analogy in the Islamic civilization of the Middle East. So what I'm going to do is connect this podcast to Sufism and see if I can find an analogy or something. Not only was the game played in defense of one's thoughts and feelings well known there, but indeed it was transformed into a permanent institution and graced with the name Ketman. I don't know what this Ketman is. Ketman. Ketman. Why do you read something you don't even know what you're reading in advance? Like you discover this stuff while you're podcasting? That is ridiculous. That's sort of like the way you play the piano. You do you go to a live performance with no practice. It's so ridiculous. Yeah, well, it's not ridiculous if that's what you state you're doing. Okay, why is it ridiculous? Well, okay. What is Ketman? Ketman. What is it? What is Ketman? All right. I found his description in a book by Kobaneau, Chobineau, entitled Religions and Philosophies of Central Asia. Gobineau spent many years in Persia. From 1855 to 1858, he was a secretary in the French legation. From 1861 to 1863, he was French minister, and we cannot deny his gift for keen observation, even though we need not necessarily agree with the conclusions of this rather dangerous writer. Yeah, and why do you read these things from these rather dangerous writers in a rather dangerous podcast and all that stuff? The similarities between my podcast and Kettman and the customs cultivated in the countries of the new faith. The countries of the new faith, they're talking about communism as being is it communism or socialism of the countries of the new faith are so striking that I should permit myself to quote at length. Okay, so the similarities between Kettman and the customs cultivated in North Korea are striking that they should permit myself to quote at length. Okay. So you are quoting at length. You're quoting this whole book, like, aren't you? If you're reading the whole book, it's like quoting the whole book. So you are quoting at length. Well, yeah, but you haven't even taken much time to podcast, okay? The people of the Muslim East believe that, quote, he is in possession of truth, must not expose. He who is in possession of truth must not expose his person, his relatives, or his reputation to the blindness, the folly, the perversity of those whom it has pleased God to place and maintain in error. He must therefore keep silent about one's true convictions if possible. So they should keep silent, I guess. Putin should just shut up. Okay. Why does he talk? Okay. Nevertheless, says Gobineau, there are occasions when silence no longer suffices, when it may pass as an avowal. Then one must not hesitate. Not only must one deny one's true opinion, but one is commanded to resort to all ruses in order to deceive one's adversary. Yeah, I'm trying to deceive the adversaries, and I'm trying to make some sort of progress in this podcast by deceiving the listeners of the podcast. One makes all the protestations of faith that can please him. One performs all the rites one recognizes to be the most vain. Yeah, and I'm able to make this podcast one of the most vain podcasts. One performs all the rites one recognizes to be the most vain. One falsifies one's own books. One exhausts all possible means of deceit. Thus one acquires the multiple satisfactions and merits of having placed oneself and one's relatives under cover, of not having exposed a venerable faith to the horrible contact of the infidel, and finally of having, in cheating the latter and confirming him in his error, imposed on him the shame and spiritual misery that he deserves. Yeah. And I'm trying to impose the shame and spiritual misery on people that deserve it. Okay. Why would you do that? Why don't you try to help people or do something? Quote, Kettman fills the man who practices it with pride, and I'm so full of pride from the fact that I practiced meditation. Okay. And you went to see the master, and you're proud of that fact, and yeah. Thanks to it, a believer raises himself to a permanent state of superiority over the man he deceives. Yeah, and it's clear that I'm in a permanent state of superiority over the listeners of this podcast. What? Thanks to it, a believer raises himself to a permanent state of superiority over the man he deceives. Be he a minister of a state or a powerful king, to him who uses Ketman, the other is a miserable blind man whom one shuts off from the true path, whose existence he does not suspect. While you, tattered and dying of hunger, trembling externally at the feet of duped force, your eyes are filled with light. Yeah. And they talk about how your eyes can be filled with light if you go to initiation and get nam down, and your eyes, third eye, will be filled with light. Your eyes are filled with light, and you walk in brightness before your enemies. It is an unintelligent being that you make sport of. It is a dangerous beast that you disarm. What a wealth of pleasures. Yeah, and my takeaway is all I care about it is the wealth of pleasures, my own pleasure. So I have I'm very wealthy in pleasure. Yeah. I have the pleasure of this podcast. I have the pleasure of my books. And I have the pleasure. I play Chopin mazurkas, and I'm playing Chopin. I did play Beethoven sonatas, and I played all of the nocturnes. You played all the Chopin nocturnes, and now you're playing the mazurkas, and you have the wealth of your pleasure of playing tennis doubles every day. And yeah, well, I'm extremely wealthy, and I have the most beautiful woman as my wife. Wow, you have a lot of pleasures. Yeah, I went to the this beach place, and it had the salt shack, and there was like this, they play like this final review, like, and they asked me, like, what kind of music is that they're playing? They asked me. And they wanted to see how I described what the music was. And I said, it's disco. And they said, that's correct. It was described as 70s disco. Also, you guessed correctly, the wealth of pleasures in the disco music. Yeah, but anyways, there was these like baby boomers, like, and you see they were so scraggly. What was the word you were saying? They were so withered. I mean, they're so, oh my God, the women, though it's nice to have a weathered woman. I thought you liked weathered women with their wrinkly skin. Well, some of them can be attractive, but I was saying that my wife was more beautiful than all of the women there. What? So your wife was more beautiful than all of the women? Well, if you look at the baby boomer women, basically they're definitely kind of worn out. Oh, yeah, well, you're worn out. Okay, well, anyways, so I love this band, actually. And you loved this whole experience. The wealth of pleasures on the beach, at the Cedar Beach in the Salt Shack. Oh, you loved this experience with all the volleyballs and the beach and your swimming and disco music and you looked at, well, I'm just saying that my wife was more beautiful than all of these women. If you don't count, say, there's some attractive women, but they're like 20 years old or something, so they don't really count in a comparison of, if you compare like eligible women or something, the eligible woman might be in her 50s or something, or 40s or 50s or whatever, like, so, yeah, she's clearly much better looking, yeah. Well, that was your wealth of your pleasures. So Well, is that what you mean by the wealth of pleasures in this podcast? Yeah. How far Ketman can go is demonstrated by the founder of one sect, Hadzi Sheikh Ahmed. Although he left behind many works of theology, he never openly advanced in his books, as even his most passionate disciples avow. Anything which can place the reader on the path of the ideas attributed to him today. But everyone affirms he practiced Ketman, and that in private he was extremely daring and precise in establishing order in the doctrines which bear his name today. Yeah, I'm saying that if you dismiss all the bad jokes and all the sides that I have, you'll realize that this podcast is extremely daring and precise. So I don't like it when people say that it's not. So we cannot wonder, therefore, that as a certain Persian admitted in conversation with Gobanal, there is not a single true Muslim in Persia. Yeah, and currently there is not a single true Muslim in Persia. Yeah, like if the current living master is not teaching or is not giving Nam Dan, and people aren't reaching enlightenment, and the third eye isn't open, then is there really a single true Muslim in Persia? Well, there could be, I suppose, but I'm not claiming that I know that they are or aren't enlightened, and especially when I'm not enlightened. What? So you're not enlightened, and you're pontificating about whether they are enlightened in current Persia? What the heck? There is not a single true Muslim in Persia? Well, within Orthodox and all these religions and any of the fundamentalist extroverted religion, like if they're extroverted, they're probably not true Muslims. If you're not going inward, if you're not going deep into meditation, if you're not sitting in silence and sitting still and sitting there for extremely long hours, then you're probably not a true Muslim or Christian. Okay. Oh, you're just saying that if you're not like an enlightened mystic, following the mystic path, you're being distracted by Orthodox organized religion? Yeah. Well, what I'm saying is organized religion sometimes just wastes your time in extroverted activities. Okay. Oh, you're saying if you're extroverted, you're wasting your time? Oh, yeah. Then why isn't your tennis playing a waste of time? Well, yeah, okay, well, a person does need exercise, even if they were practicing meditator and all this stuff. You can't really meditate 24 hours. You do have to sleep okay. Not everyone was as careful as Hadzi Sheikh Ahmed. To some, Ketman was useful in the preparatory period. But when they felt themselves sufficiently strong, they proclaimed their heresy openly. Yeah, and I've become so sufficiently strong. I'm both strong physically, and even my fat percentage has dropped, and my muscle mass, well, it hasn't gone up that much, but my weight went down, and I did go to the satsang, and I've been to see the master, and I do meditation every morning, and I don't let the master distract me, keep me up late from doing meditation. So I went home. I didn't hang out all night, and I went home and got up and I did meditation. Okay, so I'm sufficiently strong to proclaim this heresy openly in this podcast. Okay. Here, for example, is the description of itinerant preachings of Sadra, the disciple of Avicena. Okay. What are you doing reading about these Muslims within a Polish book about the captive mind, about totalitarianism? What is going on with you? Okay. Well, it's heresy, so it's openly heresy that I'm giving openly. Why would you turn to a bunch of mullahs when you're trying to solve a politics issue with the totalitarianism and captivate your mind into the stuff with the Nobel Prize? Yeah, well, he too was afraid of the mullahs. Well, aren't you afraid of the mullahs in this podcast? The Persians, that they say they're not true Muslims, or the Iranians, they might complain. And right now you've got pretty much the Russians complaining, you got North Korea complaining, you got China complaining, the Iranians are complaining. Aren't you afraid of the mullahs? Yeah, I could be. He too was afraid of the mullahs. To recite their distrust was inevitable, but to provide a solid basis, furnish proof for their accusations, that would have been to expose himself to endless persecutions, and to compromise at the same time the future of the philosophical restoration he meditated in this podcast. Therefore, he conformed to the demands of his times and resorted to the great splendid expedient of Ketman. When he arrived in a city, he was careful to present himself humbly to all the mojichets, or doctors of the region. He sat in a corner of their salons, the tawars, and remained silent usually. Yeah, well, when I go to the satsang, or I go on the tour of the master, I remain in the corner and remain silent usually. Well, but you spoke modestly and you speak brazenly in this podcast. But when you're in person, you're modest. He sat at a corner. Well, actually, when they had the food come, they had no table. It's funny. I sat in a chair on the side with no table, modestly eating my dinner. And he sat in a corner of their salon. Their toddlers remained silent, usually. He spoke modestly. I was modest, approved each word that escaped their venerable lips. He was questioned about his knowledge. He expressed only ideas borrowed from the strictest Shiite theology. Yeah, when I'm working undercover, let's say, in these countries, like maybe if I went to Iran, or when I was in Turkey, I worked undercover, and they asked, I wanted to go to basically the hot springs. Yeah, there was on the route between Konya back to Istanbul, there was these Muslim-based hot springs, but they were catered. This is off the beaten track, Turkey I was in, and they were catering to the Muslims. So this guy, I went there. It was so weird, and this guy was teaching me how to bow down to Mecca, and I was working undercover, using the strictest Shiite theology. So I was modest and in no way indicated that he's concerned himself with philosophy. Yeah, and I did indicate that I was into Sufism, and I had gone to Konya to see the tomb of Rumi, and I was indicating that I was I was a lover of Islam. So So I bowed down to Mecca, and the guy showed me how to properly kneel down, and in the strictest Shiite theology. But you were remaining silent. Or I was careful to present myself humbly in the region. And I don't want to make any waves when I'm working in these countries and stuff, so. He set to work, immediately took as his text the doctrine of abolition and some similar point, and split hairs over the prescriptions and inner doubts of the subtlest theoreticians. Yeah, this behavior delighted the mullahs, so and a lot of people were delighted by my behavior. So I am a universalist and a chameleon. So whatever religion I'm visiting, I become that religion immediately. Oh, what? So you are a conformist, at least on the surface, yeah. His behavior delighted the mullahs. Yeah, and if you look deep into these podcasts, you would probably, if you were a mullah, you could be delighted, because this is I'm pro deep religious devotion and meditation. They lauded him to the skies. They lauded me to the skies. They lauded him to the skies. They forgot to keep an eye on him. Yeah, and then they let me go, and we got into the hot bath and took a nap. So you were just interested in the pleasures, the wealth of pleasures. Yeah, I really was just an extroverted person who was sensual and interested in the wealth of pleasures, of sensual pleasures, in the hot spring. So I present myself as a deep, spiritually enlightened person who's way above the world of the senses, but I really, underneath, just wanted to sit in the hot spring. Okay, so you did find the wealth of pleasures, yeah. The divine unity from the doctrines, and they wanted to see him lead their imaginations through less placid questions. He did not refuse, and from the doctrine of abolition, he passed to that of prayer, from the doctrine of prayer to that of revelation, and from revelation to divine unity. And there, with marvels of ingenuity, reticence, confidences to the most advanced pupils, self-contradiction, ambiguous propositions, fallacious syllogisms, out of which only the initiated could see their way, the whole heavily seasoned with impeccable professions of faith, he succeeded in spreading Avicennalism throughout the entire lettered class. And when at last he believed he could reveal himself completely, he drew aside the veils, repudiated Islam, and showed himself the logician, the metaphysician that he really was. So in the end, I was able to show who I really was, and I revealed the truth. I revealed the truth in this podcast. Okay. So, what's the point here? Oh, okay. It's the truth is the point in this podcast. Okay. Good.
Annihilation.